My name is Nora. I'm 28 years old. 3 days after I gave birth, alone, still bleeding, still hooked to an 4-pole because my blood pressure kept dropping, my own father stood at the foot of my hospital bed and looked at me like I was a bill he'd already paid. And he said, "When they let you out, go back to your husband's people. You're not coming home with us." My mother didn't even flinch. She was standing behind him with her arms folded, holding a folder. Not flowers. Not a blanket. A folder. And she said, "You stopped being our responsibility a long time ago, Nora. If we're being honest, you never really were." My husband had burned to death in his workshop 11 days earlier. Our house burned with him. Everything we owned turned into a black rectangle in the ground. I had a 4-pound 13-ounce reason to keep breathing sleeping on my chest, and I had nowhere on this earth to take him. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't beg either. I just sat there and I let them talk. And they walked out of that room thinking they'd won. They thought my silence meant I'd folded. It didn't. It meant I was counting. Because 48 hours before that conversation, I had already found something in my husband's phone that I couldn't unfind. And 11 hours after they left, at 11:47 at night, with my son asleep on my chest, I made one phone call. One. And 2 days later, when the door of room 214 opened and my father saw who was standing in it, a fire marshal in full uniform, with a homicide detective one step behind him, the color went out of his face like somebody pulled a plug. He didn't ask a question. He didn't say a word. He turned around and tried to run. That was the moment everything he'd done in the dark started catching fire in the light. If you're watching this right now, do me one favor before we go any further, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I read every single one, and I'm going to need you by the end of this. Now let me start where it actually started. I heard them before I saw them. Room 214 at Mercy Ridge Regional had thin walls and a hard tile floor, and after 2 weeks in that room I could tell you who was coming just by the sound. The nurses shuffled, soft saws, quick turns. The doctors clicked. Visitors dragged their feet and stopped outside the door, checking the number twice. These footsteps were different. Heavy. Even. Work boots, walking like they had every right to be there. I looked up. Micah was asleep on my chest, 4 days old, doing that little frown newborns do when they're dreaming about nothing. It was December 2nd. 2:18 in the afternoon. The door opened. My father didn't smile. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He came in and he scanned the bassinet by the window, the 4-pole, the discharge folder on the counter, the whiteboard with my nurse's name on it. Like a man walking through a house he was thinking about buying. He did not look at the baby. Not one time. My mother came in behind him carrying that manila folder with 3 yellow sticky tabs already sticking out the side. She walked to the bed and set it down on my lap. "No, congratulations. No, what's his name? No, can I see him? Just the folder." Dropped on my legs like a work order. "When are they discharging you?" my father said. Not "how are you?" Not "can I hold him?" "When are they discharging you?" I shifted Micah a little. My hands were shaking and I hated that they were. They said the 5th. Maybe the 6th. My pressure keeps dropping, so they want to watch it. "That's another 4 days, he said. He looked at his watch. Then 30 seconds later, he looked at it again. My mother had backed up toward the door. Still hadn't looked at her grandson. 4 days old. 96 hours on this planet, and his own grandmother wouldn't put her eyes on him. "We need to talk about what happens next," my father said. And I felt my whole body go tight. Micah stirred against my chest and I put my hand flat on his back, that little back, all ribs and warmth, born 8 days early because my body just couldn't hold on to him anymore after Caleb died. "Caleb's family should be handling this," my father said. "You've got in-laws for this kind of thing." I stared at him. "Handling what?" You. He said it exactly like that. Like I was a problem on a list that needed to get assigned to somebody. You can't come home with us. We're not set up for a baby. And my mother, from over by the door, nodded and said, "You're a grown woman, Nora. You'll figure it out. I want you to picture this with me. I'm in a hospital gown. I've got a fresh surgical incision across my abdomen that I can't stand up straight from. I'm still bleeding through what they give you. There's a plastic bracelet on my wrist and a matching one on a baby who will never meet his father. And my parents are standing 4 feet away telling me I'm not their problem." "You're saying this now," I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. "Well, I'm still, when you recover," my father cut in, "go back to his people. We don't want you at the house." And I didn't touch that folder again until almost 6 o'clock. I fed Micah. A nurse named Dorothy came in and helped me get him latched and told me I was doing better than I thought I was, which was a lie, but it was a kind one. She checked my incision. She wrote my numbers on the board. And then she said something that stuck to me. She said, "Honey, your in-laws have been here every single day since the 19th. Do you want me to call them?" Every single day since the 19th. Walt and Corinne, Caleb's parents, had driven 9 hours overnight from Cheyenne the morning after their son died. They'd been at a motel 4 miles up the road ever since. They'd held Micah before either of my parents even knew his name. Corinne washed my hair in the hospital's sink on day 3 because I couldn't lift my arms over my head yet. Their son was dead. And they were washing my hair. My parents lived 22 minutes away and it took them 14 days. So around 6, when Micah went down, I opened that folder. And I looked at those forms, really looked at them, and something about them made the back of my neck go cold. I couldn't tell you what yet. It was that feeling you get when a picture on the wall is off by half an inch and you can't figure out which one. So I picked up my phone, and I scrolled back. Way back. Past the fire. Past the funeral I'd watched on a video call from a hospital bed because they wouldn't let me leave. All the way back to September. September 12th. A Sunday. My father showed up at our house at 2 in the afternoon without calling first, and he was carrying his old briefcase, the brown leather one with the brass latches he'd used for 31 years at the agency. He'd been retired for 4 years. But he still carried that briefcase like he was walking into a meeting. I remember thinking that was strange. I remember thinking it and then letting it go, because that's what you do with your parents. You notice the strange thing and you file it under that's just how he is. I was 7 months pregnant. Caleb and I were in that stage where everything felt enormous. The crib was half built in the living room, we had paint samples taped to the nursery wall, and we were both quietly terrified in that good way. My father sat down at our kitchen table without being asked, put the briefcase flat, and popped both latches. "We need to talk about protecting the baby," he said. My mother took the chair by the window and folded her hands. "Young families are exposed," my father said. "Nobody thinks about it until it's too late. What happens if something happens to Caleb before that baby comes? What happens if something happens to you?" I remember Caleb shifting in his chair next to me. He got quiet the way he always did when somebody talked too fast. "You need life insurance," my father said. "Real coverage. Not the little rider from your bank. 740,000. Caleb's eyebrows went up. That's a big number, Roy. I build furniture." "You're about to be a father," my father said, and his voice went sharp. Not loud. Sharp. "This is the bare minimum of being responsible." And my mother said, in that soft reasonable voice she uses, "We just want Nora and the baby taken care of." I put my hand on Caleb's arm. I said, "And God, I have replayed this 10,000 times." I said, "It's okay, babe. My dad does this for a living." Caleb nodded. "Because he loved me. Because he didn't want to fight with my family 6 weeks before our son was born. Because he genuinely believed the man across the table was trying to help. He did ask one question. Just one. He said, "Why that exact number? Why not 500? Why not 1,000,000 even?" And my father looked at him, and I watched this happen and I did nothing, and he said, "Do you care about my daughter's future or don't you? That's it. That's the whole trick." He turned a math question into a loyalty test in one sentence. Now Caleb couldn't ask again without looking like a man who didn't love his wife. "Of course I do," Caleb said quietly. My father slid the papers across the table. The pens were already sitting on the signature lines. He'd placed them there before he sat down. I signed first. Page 7. My name on the line that said insured party, primary. Caleb signed second. Same page. Insured party, spouse. My father signed as witness. And then his hand moved down the page and he wrote something else in a section further down, and I did. Here's the part that broke me. Caleb wrote it down. That night, September 12, 11:40 p.m., while I was asleep in the next room, my husband opened the Notes app on his phone and typed 4 lines. I found them sitting in that hospital bed 81 days later. He wrote, "Roy pushed way too hard on the 740. Asked him twice how he got that number. Changed the subject both times. Why 740? Why not 500 or 1,000,000? Too specific. It's like he already knew the number before he walked in. Nora trusts him. Not going to make it a thing. But something's off. Something's off." He knew. Not all of it, not the worst of it, but some part of my husband looked at my father across our own kitchen table and knew that something was wrong. And he swallowed it. For me. To keep peace in my family. And it killed him. 8 days later, September 20th, Caleb did something else. He printed the complete policy, every page, put it in a manila envelope, and wrote across the front in that terrible left-handed scrawl of his, "Insurance, our copy. Keep this one." And then he walked into our bedroom and put it in my hospital bag. The bag I'd packed 2 months early because I'm the kind of person who packs early. I said, "Why are you putting that in there?" And he said, "Just keep it with you, Nor." I didn't understand that for 81 days. I understand it now. The nurses had brought me that bag from what was left. It had been in the trunk of Caleb's truck, parked out on the gravel, which is the only reason it survived. His truck is the reason I have anything at all, his wallet, his ring, his phone, and one manila envelope. I pulled it out at 7:15 that night, December 2nd, and I opened it on the tray table with one hand while Micah slept on me. Full policy. 9 pages. Nothing missing. And then I laid it next to the 3 pages my mother had dropped on my lap that afternoon. Page 3 was gone from their version. So I read page 3 in Caleb's copy. Out loud, actually, in a whisper, because I wanted to hear it. Page 3 was titled Beneficiary Rights and Elections. It was one full page explaining that the primary beneficiary, me, had the right to decline the payout, to contest a claim, to redirect the funds, to request an independent review, and to revoke any assignment made on her behalf within 90 days. Every option I had. On the page he removed. He needed me to not know I had choices. But that wasn't the worst thing on that table. Not by a long way. Because then I turned to page 4. The middle of the policy. The part nobody reads, because he'd walked us straight to page 7 to sign. Page 4 said, "Primary beneficiary, Nora Ansley Bellamy, $740,000, 100%. And underneath that, in smaller print, contingent beneficiaries, in the event of the primary beneficiary's death, disqualification, or written declination, Roy A. Ansley, 50% Paulette M. Ansley, 50% $370,000 each. If Caleb died, I got the money. If Caleb and I both died, my parents split it. I sat there in the dark with my son breathing on my chest and I did the only math that mattered. Policy signed, September 12th. The fire that killed my husband, November 19th. 9 weeks. And 4 days. I want to be careful here, because this is the part where I stopped being a grieving widow and became something else. I opened Caleb's phone. His passcode was my birthday, 0417, which I'd made fun of him for 100 times. I went to his messages. And I scrolled to the night before the fire. November 18th, 11:49 p.m., my father, to me, you feeling any better, sweetie? Did they send you home yet? 11:53 p.m., me, to my father, still here. Contractions stopped but they want me overnight to be safe. Now watch what he does 5 minutes later. 11:58 p.m., my father, to Caleb, hey Caleb. Nora's staying at the hospital tonight. You doing alright over there by yourself? Need anything? 12:06 a.m., Caleb, to my father, all good, thanks Roy. Finishing the Delaney order. Should be wrapped by 2. The fire started at 2:04 in the morning. My husband told my father, in writing, that he would be alone in that workshop until 2 o'clock. And at 2:04, the workshop went up. I had to put the phone down. I actually had to set it face down on the blanket and breathe for about 3 minutes, because my hands went numb and I was scared I'd drop my baby. And then I picked it back up. Because I wasn't done. I went into his photos and I scrolled back to September 12th, and there it was, Caleb had taken pictures. 4 of them. Of our kitchen table. Of my father's open briefcase. I don't know why he took them. Maybe some part of him was building a file too. I zoomed in on the 3rd one, and in the top pocket of that briefcase there was a yellow legal pad, and on it, in my father's blocky all-caps handwriting, 3 lines, accelerant/origin, insurer response. 740K term, 2 years contestability, suicide clause, not applicable accident. He was researching how insurance companies respond to fire claims, before he sat down at our table and made my husband sign. 2 months before Caleb burned. That's not a father. I don't know what that is. But it isn't a father. If you're feeling what I was feeling right there, type 740 in the comments. Just the number. I want to see how many of you saw it before I did. People here, she was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and they assume I was hiding. That I could have checked myself out. That I was dragging my feet because I didn't want to go home. There was no home. That's the part they don't get. The fire started in Caleb's workshop at 2:04 a.m. on November 19th. But it didn't stay in the workshop. He'd built that shop himself the summer we got married, attached it to the back of the house through a breezeway, because he said he wanted to be able to walk to work in his socks. That breezeway is what killed us. Whatever was used that night burned so fast and so hot that by the time the first engine rolled up at 2:12, both structures were fully involved. Everything went. The nursery I painted at 31 weeks, on a stepladder, while he yelled at me to get down. The crib he built out of white oak with a hidden drawer underneath for blankets. Our wedding photos. My grandmother's quilt. His tools. His drawings, 3 sketchbooks of furniture he never got to build. The Christmas ornaments we'd been collecting 1 a year. 11 years of 2 people. Gone in about 40 minutes. Here's the timeline of me. I checked into Mercy Ridge on November 18th at 10:26 p.m. false labor. Contractions that came on strong and quit after an hour. Standard overnight monitoring for a woman at 34 weeks with high pressure. I was supposed to go home the next morning. At 2:41 a.m., a sheriff's deputy called the nurse's station and asked them to put the phone in my hand. I don't remember what he said. I remember the sound the phone made when it hit the floor. The doctors would not discharge me. High-risk pregnancy, acute trauma, signs of preterm labor. So I stayed in room 214 and watched November 19th turn into the 20th, then the 21st, then the 22nd. My parents didn't call. Didn't visit. Didn't ask a single nurse how I was doing. Walt and Corinne drove all night from Cheyenne and walked in the morning of the 20th with their eyes swollen shut from crying, and the first thing Corinne said to me, before anything, was, "We're here now, sweetheart. You're not by yourself." Their son was in a body bag. And that's what she led with. On November 28th my body gave out. Blood pressure spiked, the monitors started screaming, and they took me back for an emergency C-section at 5:50 in the morning. Micah Caleb Bellamy. Born 6:23 a.m. 4 pounds 13 ounces. 8 days early. Perfect. Walt and Corinne got there at 9:15, not because they didn't care, but because it happened in 90 minutes in the middle of the night and there wasn't time. So yes. I gave birth alone. No husband. No mother. No one who'd known me as a child. Just me, an anesthesiologist named Priya, and a fear so big I couldn't get my mouth around it. But I did it. And when Walt held him for the first time, he sat down hard in the chair and cried and said, "Oh, honey. He's got Caleb's chin." Then I waited. November 29th. Nothing. 30th. Nothing. December 1st. Nothing. For days I lay in that bed with my phone face up on the blanket wondering if my mother was going to want to meet her grandson. And on December 2nd at 2:18 in the afternoon, they finally came. For 11 minutes. I sat in that room for 9 hours after they left. Nurses came in and out. They took my blood pressure. They took Micah's temperature. Dorothy brought me a tray of food I did not touch and then came back an hour later and quietly took it away without saying anything about it, which is its own kind of kindness. And I sat there trying to figure out if I was losing my mind. Because here's the thing nobody warns you about. When the person you're accusing is your own father, your brain fights you the entire way. Every time I lined up a fact, another part of me said, "You're exhausted. You haven't slept in 11 days. You're grieving. You're seeing patterns because you need this to make sense. 9 weeks and 4 days? Coincidence? A missing page 3? Sloppy printing. 2 months of notes about accelerants. He worked in insurance for 31 years. That's just what's in his head. A text at 11:58 p.m. asking my husband if he'd be alone? That one I couldn't get around. At 11:47 p.m. on December 2nd, I picked up my phone. There was a number in my contacts I hadn't looked at since the funeral. Marcus Doyle. Fire marshal for the county. He'd gone through the academy with Caleb's older brother 20 years back, and he'd stood at the back of the church in his dress uniform with his hat in his hands. He'd handed me a card at the reception and said one sentence that I'd been too numb to hear properly at the time. He'd said, "Nora, if anything ever occurs to you. Anything. Even if it sounds crazy. You call me. Even if it sounds crazy. That's not what you say to a widow after an accident. That's what you say to a witness." I hit call. It rang 4 times and I almost hung up. Doyle. Marshall Doyle. It's Nora Bellamy. Caleb's wife. My voice came apart on wife. "I need to ask you something about the fire and I need you to tell me if I'm crazy." And there was this pause on the line. About 3 seconds. And when he came back his whole voice had changed. He said, "Nora. I have been waiting for this phone call for 2 weeks. "I've been trying to reach you," he said. "The hospital wouldn't give out your room and your in-laws only had a landline that's gone." I sat up as far as my incision would let me. "Marshall, my father was there. That night. At the scene." Another pause. And when he answered like a man choosing every word carefully, because he knew he was about to change my life. "Your father was the first person on that property," he said. "Before the neighbors. Before us." "How do you know that?" "Because I've got him on the pump panel camera on engine 12 and on a doorbell camera across the street." The 911 call came in at 2:07 from the neighbor. "First unit on scene at 2:12. Your father's truck is parked at the end of that driveway at 2:09. "9, I said. 2:09. He lives 22 minutes away. 24, the way I clocked it. And that's daytime speed. So no. He did not drive there after the call. He was already close." I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Micah shifted on my chest and I put a hand on him to steady us both. "There's something else," Doyle said. "And I'll be honest with you, ma'am, I've been sitting on it because I did not want to put it on a pregnant widow without cause. But you called me, so I'm going to say it. That fire has 3 points of origin. 3. 3 separate V patterns. Northeast corner, southwest corner, and along the south wall by the breezeway door. Fires don't start in 3 places at the same time by themselves, Nora. Not electrical. Not a spark off a sander. Not a bad extension cord. That's a person, walking the room." I closed my eyes. Part of me, I need you to understand this, part of me had been praying to be wrong. Praying I was a crazy sleep-deprived woman making a monster out of a man who just wasn't very warm. "Marshall," I said. "There's a life insurance policy." And I told him. All of it. September 12th. The briefcase. The 740. The loyalty test. The notes on the legal pad. The missing page 3. Page 4 with my parents listed as contingent. The 11:58 text. The forms my mother had put on my lap 11 hours earlier. He didn't interrupt me once. When I finished he was quiet for so long I said, "Are you still there?" And he said, "Nora, listen to me very carefully. Do not sign one single thing your parents give you. Not a form, not a card, not a hospital release. Nothing with your name on it. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "Don't tell them we spoke. Don't tell anyone but Caleb's parents, and tell them to keep it off the phone. I'm bringing a detective from arson homicide. Give me 2 days." "Marshall." "Yes, ma'am." "Am I crazy?" And he said, "No, sweetheart. You're the first person in this whole thing who's been thinking straight." I did not sleep that night. Not really. Micah woke every 3 hours. My incision hurt in a deep, dragging way that made me sweat. And in between, I built a file on a hospital tray table with a phone and a pen and the back of a discharge instruction sheet. I wrote the timeline out by hand because I needed to see it in ink. September 12th, policy signed. Father brings pens. September 13th, father pays $3,100 cash, 6 months up front. September 20th, Caleb hides the full copy in my hospital bag. November 16th? Something. Don't know yet. November 18th, 11:58 p.m., father confirms Caleb is alone. November 19th, 2:04 a.m., fire. November 19th, 2:09 a.m., father on scene. Impossible. December 2nd, 2:18 p.m., folder. Page 3 removed. That question mark on November 16th bothered me all night, and I didn't know why. It was just a hole in the shape of the thing. Hold on to that. It comes back. Then I went back through Caleb's photos one more time, slower this time, corner by corner, like Doyle would. And in the fourth picture of that briefcase, underneath the policy pages, sticking out about an inch, there was a receipt. Small. Thermal paper. Curled at the edge. I zoomed until it went to mush. I couldn't read the store. I couldn't read the amount. But I could read 6 characters of the date line. And they were enough to make my stomach turn over. Then I found the last thing. I laid the pages side by side again, Caleb's copy and my mother's copy, and I looked at page 4 one more time, and this time I looked at the signatures. On Caleb's copy, my father had signed as witness in blue ink. Fine. Normal. But on my mother's copy, underneath that witness line, there was a second entry. Different ink. Black. Slightly different slant, like it was written at a different time, at a different desk, in a different mood. It read, Designated Financial Custodian, Minor Child, if applicable Roy A. Ansley. It wasn't there in September. He added it later. Which means the 3 pages my mother set on my lap were not insurance forms. They were a transfer. If I had signed where those 3 yellow tabs said to sign, I would have declined my payout as primary beneficiary, and in the same stroke, handed my father legal control of $740,000 on behalf of my 4-day-old son. He wasn't there to see the baby. He wasn't there to check on me. He was there for a signature. While I was bleeding. While I was alone. While I was so tired I could barely read. He picked 2:18 because the hall was empty. He picked the 4th day because that's when the epidural fog and the grief and the sleep loss all stack on top of each other and a person will sign anything just to make the conversation end. I photographed all of it. 31 pictures. Both versions of every page, the torn staple line, the 2 inks, the notes in the briefcase, the texts, my handwritten timeline. At 11:52 the next night I texted Doyle, I found something else. It's worse. He answered in 90 seconds. Send everything. Don't discuss with anyone. We'll be there tomorrow at 3. I sent 31 photos. Then I sat in the dark with my son on my chest and I said something out loud that I have never told anybody until right now. I said, I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I brought him around us. And Micah slept right through it, warm and breathing, completely unaware that a man had done arithmetic on his father's life and come up with a number. If you want to hear exactly what happened when that door opened, and if you have ever been let down by family at the one moment I'd asked Corinne to take Micah down to the family lounge at 10 to 3. She didn't ask why. She just looked at my face for about 2 seconds, took him out of my arms, and said, We'll be right down the hall, honey. At 2:58, there was a knock. Come in. The door opened, and Marcus Doyle walked in first. Full uniform. County Fire Marshal's badge on his chest, hat under his arm. He looked nothing like the man at the funeral. He looked like a man on the clock. Behind him came a woman about 45. Gray blazer. Detective's shield on her belt. A small recorder already in her hand. Mrs. Bellamy, Doyle said, this is Detective Renata Voss. Arson and homicide. Homicide. The word just sat down in the room and took up space. Before we start, Voss said, I need you to understand that as of 9 o'clock this morning this is an open criminal investigation. Everything said here is on the record. I nodded. My hands were flat on the blanket to keep them still. We went through everything you sent, she said. The policy, the 2 versions, the ink, the texts, the photos of the notepad. She paused. Ma'am, I want to say this plainly. You didn't imagine any of it. What do you have? I asked. Doyle pulled out a tablet and turned it toward me. Burn patterns. 3 photographs of what used to be my husband's workshop, all black and skeletal. This is a V pattern, he said, tracing it with his finger. Narrow at the bottom, spreading up and out. That's where a fire is born. He swiped. Here's a second one. 22 feet away. He swiped again. Here's a third. 3, I said. 3. And lab came back yesterday. Lacquer thinner. Concentrated at all 3 points. I shook my head before he even finished. Caleb didn't use lacquer thinner. He didn't use any of it. He was water-based only, verdant finish supply out of Salem. He was proud of it. He put it on his business cards. We know, Voss said. We pulled 2 years of his purchase history. Not one petroleum product. Not one. So we started asking where 4 gallons of lacquer thinner came from. She reached into her folder. She put a receipt on my tray table. A photocopy, blown up. Kessler Hardware and Supply, Route November 9, 16 to 4:47 p.m. Lacquer thinner 1 gallon X4, $71.16 cash November 16. The question mark on my timeline. The hole in the shape of it. There's counter-camera footage, Voss said quietly. We've got 22 seconds of clean face. Would you like to see it, or would you rather I just tell you? Tell me. It's your father, ma'am. I looked at that receipt for a long time. $71.16. That's what it cost. That's what my husband was worth on paper, $71.16 in materials, against $740,000 in return. I remember thinking, very clearly and very calmly, he paid cash so there'd be no card record, but he didn't think about the camera. He's smart, but he's not as smart as he thinks he is. We have warrants for his phone records and his accounts, Voss said. They came through this morning. But before we execute, we'd like a voluntary statement. We'd like to hear what he says when we ask him where he was at 2 in the morning on the 19th, 3 knocks. Loud. Fast. And then the door opened before anybody answered it, because in his entire life my father has never once waited to be told he could come in. He walked in mid-sentence, already talking. Nora, we brought somebody to help you get this paperwork squared away so you can, and he stopped. My mother was 1 step behind him. And behind her was a nervous man in a gray suit holding a small case and a stamp. A notary. They had brought a notary public to my hospital room. My father's eyes went to Doyle's uniform. Then to the badge on Voss's belt. Then to me. And the blood just left his face. All of it. Top to bottom, like water going out of a glass. Because he recognized Marcus Doyle. He'd stood 12 feet from that man at 2:12 in the morning on November 19th with his hands in his pockets, watching my house burn. Mr. Ansley, Doyle said. Perfectly calm. Perfectly pleasant. I've been hoping to catch up with you. My father's hand closed on the door frame. His knuckles went white. We'll come back another time, he said, and he was already turning. Sir. Voss moved. Not fast. She just stepped once, and suddenly she was between my father and the door. We have a few questions about the 19th. Won't take long. My mother's face did something I'd never seen it do. It came apart. Roy, she said. Why is there a fire marshal in here? The notary was already backing toward the corner by the window, reading the room, doing the math on what he'd walked into. 20 seconds later he slipped out the door sideways and I never saw him again. Smart man. Mr. Ansley, Doyle said, how did you come to be standing at 4180 Halstead Road at 2:09 in the morning? Silence. You live 24 minutes away, Doyle said. The 911 call went out at 2:07. Our first engine arrived at 2:12. You beat us there. I'd genuinely like to understand how. My father's mouth opened. Closed. Opened. I couldn't sleep, he said. I was out driving. At 2 in the morning, Voss said. On a Tuesday. In November. In the direction of your daughter's house. I saw the smoke. From 24 minutes away, Doyle said. At night. Through a residential grid with 60-foot firs on both sides of Halstead. Sir, I've been doing this 19 years. Try again. I was just, Dad. Everybody in that room turned. I was sitting up in a hospital bed with a surgical drain still taped to my side and my hair in a knot I hadn't touched in 3 days. But my voice came out level. I don't know where it came from. I really don't. I said, why did you text Caleb at 11:58 that night? Why did you need to know if I was going to be in that house? And I watched my father's face go from white to gray. And then, he ran. He turned and lunged for the door handle. Not a walk. Not a this is over, we're leaving. He shoved his shoulder toward the gap between Voss and the wall like a man trying to get out of a burning building. Sir. Sir. Voss got a hand on the door and held it. And that was the moment. Not the receipt, not the burn patterns, not the ink. That. Because innocent men don't run. Innocent men get angry. Innocent men say how dare you. Innocent men sit down in the chair and say ask me anything you want, I've got nothing to hide, my son-in-law is dead. They do not try to squeeze past a homicide detective to get out of their daughter's hospital room. My mother had gone completely still. She was staring at the back of her husband's head like she'd never seen it before. Roy, she said. Why are you trying to leave? He didn't answer her. He turned around slowly and he looked at me, and for about 2 seconds his face wasn't a face I recognized. It was pure, naked animal fear. And underneath it, something worse. Calculation. Even then. Even standing there. He was still running numbers. Sit down, Mr. Ansley, Doyle said. Please. He wouldn't sit. He stood with his back flat against the wall by the door for the next 26 minutes. My mother sat. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to trap them between her knees. Voss laid it out like a woman reading a grocery list. November 19th. 2:04 a.m., fire ignites at 4180 Halstead. 2:07, neighbor calls it in. 2:09, your vehicle is at the property. 2:12, engine 12 arrives. 2:31, the roof of the main structure comes down. She looked up. Mr. Ansley, you spent 31 years reading fire investigation reports for an insurance carrier. You know what 3 points of origin means. What does it mean? My mother whispered. It means somebody said it, Doyle said. With accelerant. What accelerant? Lacquer thinner, Voss said. 4 gallons. Purchased in cash on November 16 at Kessler Hardware on Route 9 at 4:47 in the afternoon. She slid the receipt across the little rolling table so it stopped in front of my mother. The counter camera got a clear face. My mother looked down at that piece of paper for a long, long time. Then she said one word. Roy. He said nothing. Let's talk about the messages, Doyle said. He read them out loud. My father asking me if I was home. Me answering that I was staying at the hospital. And then, 5 minutes later, my father texting my husband to confirm he'd be by himself. Why, Doyle said, did you need to know your daughter would not be in that house? Silence. The shop door showed no forced entry, Voss said. No broken glass, no jimmied jam, no damage to the strike plate. Which tells us Caleb opened it. At 1-something in the morning, he unlocked his own door for somebody he trusted. I heard myself make a sound. I don't know how to describe it. Doyle turned to me and his voice dropped. Nora. Do you want the rest of this? Yes. He had his headphones on. The over-ear ones, we found what was left of them by the bench. He said it gently. He always wore them running the sander. It means he didn't hear anything, and with the dust collection running he wouldn't have smelled it for a while either. By the time he knew, both exits were involved. The lab work says smoke inhalation, not burns. He was unconscious before the fire ever reached him, Nora. He would not have known much. I nodded. I couldn't talk. There's one more thing, Voss said, and she looked at my father when she said it. The accelerant wasn't only in the shop. Doyle put a hand flat on the table. We found it in the breezeway, he said. And we found it in the hall outside your bedroom. The room went so quiet I could hear the ice machine down the hall. My bedroom, I said. Yes, ma'am. I was supposed to be discharged at 8 that morning, I said slowly. I was supposed to be home. I was supposed to be asleep in that bed. Yes, ma'am. We know. My mother stood straight up out of the chair. You tried to kill Nora? And my father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who walked me down an aisle 4 years ago, who cried at my wedding in front of 140 people, said nothing at all. No denial. No outrage. No, how could you say that to me? Nothing. That's when it stopped hurting, if you want the truth. Right there. Somewhere in that silence, whatever was left in me that still belonged to him just closed. Like a door in a draft. Voss picked up the 3 pages my mother had brought 2 days earlier and held them up. Mrs. Bellamy, I want you to hear what these are, she said. These are not insurance claim forms. Page 1 is a beneficiary declination. If you'd signed it, you'd have permanently waived your right to the $740,000 payout. Which would have gone to the contingent beneficiaries, Doyle said. Him. And her. And this, Voss said, tapping the second page, is a custodial designation. It names your father financial custodian of the minor child. So even in the version where you don't sign the declination, even in the version where you live and you inherit, he controls the account until Micah is 18. He had 2 ways to win, she said. Either I died in that house, or I signed while I was too broken to read. That's our read, Voss said. Yes. And that's when my father finally spoke. He pushed off the wall and he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since he'd walked in, and his voice cracked right down the middle. "You're really going to do this?" he said. "To your own father?" I shifted in the bed. I made sure my hands were steady. I made sure my voice was low, because I've learned that quiet lands harder than loud. I said, "You killed my husband. Nora, you bought 4 gallons of lacquer thinner 3 days before. You texted him at midnight to make sure he'd be alone. He opened his own door for you. And then you poured it down the hallway outside the room I sleep in." "I was trying to help you," he shouted. And he was crying now, red-faced, hands out. "That money would have set you up for the rest of your life. Both of you would have been." He stopped. He heard it about half a second too late. I watched it happen. I watched the exact instant his own sentence caught up with him and put its hand on his shoulder. Doyle heard it too. "Both of you," Doyle repeated quietly. "Both of who, Mr. Ansley?" Silence. "Because right now there's a widow and a baby in this room," Doyle said. "So when you say, both of you would have been, you're talking about a plan that only pays out if Caleb and Nora are gone." My father's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He had just said it. In front of a county fire marshal, a homicide detective, an active recorder, his own wife, and me. 22 words. That's all it took. He'd been careful for 3 months and he blew it in 22 words, because he couldn't stand to be looked at like that by his own daughter. Pride. That's what it was. In the end, that's all it was. My mother came up out of the chair screaming. I'd never heard her raise her voice in my life. Not once, in 28 years. She was the woman who corrected you by going quiet. "You told me it was an accident." She was hitting his chest with the flat of her hand. "You told me you were asleep when they called. You told me you drove out there because you couldn't believe it. You sat in my kitchen and you cried." She stopped dead. And then she said, very slowly, in a voice I'll hear for the rest of my life, "You cried on purpose." My father looked at the floor. "Mr. Roy Ansley," Detective Voss said, and she said his full name the way you'd read it off a headstone. "You're under arrest on suspicion of murder in the first degree, aggravated arson, attempted murder, and insurance fraud." She started reading him his rights. And I sat there in that bed and I waited to feel something. Satisfaction, maybe. Rage. Some kind of hot, righteous surge. It never came. What came instead was this cold, clean, almost boring certainty. Like finishing a long math problem and finding the answer was exactly what you'd written at the top of the page. He tried one more time. He turned in the cuffs, halfway to the door, and he said, "Nora. Baby. Please." And I said one word. "No." That's it. That's all I had for him. 28 years, and 1 syllable. They walked him out at 3:41 in the afternoon down the main corridor of the 4th floor, and it was the worst possible time, because visiting hours had just started. The hallway was packed. Nurses. Families. A kid in a wagon with an 4-pole. 2 women outside the elevator with their phones already up. My father, 62 years old, in his good coat, walked out of Mercy Ridge Regional in handcuffs in front of 40 strangers. He turned his head at my door. He wanted my eyes. I looked at the window instead. That's the last thing I ever gave him. The side of my face. She stayed. She sat in that vinyl hospital chair and folded in half and made a sound I have only ever heard once before, and that was from Corinne, on the 20th of November, when she saw a picture of what was left of the shop. Dorothy came in and sat with her and got her water and rubbed her back, because nurses are the only people in this world who show up for everybody. Voss crouched down beside her. "Mrs. Ansley. We'd like your statement separate from your husband's. You're going to want representation before we do that." "I'll tell you anything," my mother said. "Anything. Ask me anything. Then she turned to me and grabbed the rail of my bed. Nora. I swear to you. On my life. On that baby's life. I did not know. And here's the thing. I believed her. I still believe her. I don't think my mother knew a fire was coming. I don't think she'd have sat in a church at his funeral and rubbed my back through the eulogy if she'd known her husband struck the match. But I looked at her sitting in that chair and I heard myself say something I'd never planned to say. I said, Mom. Did you know I had nowhere to go? She stopped crying. Did you know that on December 2nd? When you set that folder on my legs? Yes. Did you know I'd had a C-section 4 days before? Did the nurses tell you they were monitoring my pressure? Did you know that everything I owned in the world was in a black plastic bag in that closet right there? She couldn't look at me. You didn't know about the fire, I said. Fine. I believe you. But you knew I was alone. You knew I was hurt. You knew I had a newborn and no house. And you looked me in the face and told me I was December 6th. 15 days total. November 18th to December 6th. Walt carried my bag. Corinne carried Micah in the car seat, and she held it with both hands like it was full of eggs the whole way down. They'd already extended their motel stay, moved to a 2-room suite, and set up a bassinet next to the window before they ever told me they'd done it. I started to say thank you and Walt cut me off. He said, Nora. You're not a guest. You're ours. You stay till you don't want to. That's it. That's what family sounds like. It's not fancy. It took him 9 words. Formal charges came down December 9th. Murder 1. Aggravated arson. Attempted murder. Insurance fraud. Held without bail, flight risk and danger to the community, which is a hard thing to read about your own father in a court document. The evidence file was, in the DA's words, unusually complete. 3 points of origin. Lab confirmed accelerant. A cash receipt with a face on camera. Cell tower data putting his phone within a half mile of Halstead Road at 1:41 in the morning, 45 minutes before ignition. The text messages. 2 versions of a policy with 2 different inks. And 31 photographs taken by a woman in a hospital bed who was supposed to be too tired to notice anything. And the notes on that legal pad. In his own handwriting. 2 months early. The local station picked it up on the 11th. Retired insurance agent charged in son-in-law's death. They kept my name out of it. I was the victim's widow. But everybody who knew him saw it, his old colleagues, the neighbors, the men he golfed with on Thursdays, the entire congregation at the church where he'd read scripture on Christmas Eve for 19 years. His attorney floated a plea in January. He turned it down. He actually turned it down. He told his lawyer he could beat it. He said a jury of parents would understand that a man was only trying to protect his family. He still didn't get it. He never got it. In his head he wasn't a murderer, he was a guy who'd made a smart, unsentimental decision that other people were too soft to understand. My mother called in the middle of December. Then again. Then from numbers I didn't know. On the 22nd I answered. Nora. Her voice was ruined. Please. Can we talk? I filed for divorce. I gave them everything, I testified, I'm doing everything they ask. You testified to protect yourself, I said. Not because you understand what you did to me. That's not fair. Mom, you came to my hospital room and told me I was never your responsibility. And then you asked me to sign something you hadn't even read. Silence on the line. I know, she said finally. I know. I'm so sorry. Can we please just talk about going forward, about the baby, about, you didn't call me once, I said. Not one time in 14 days. Not after my house burned. Not after my husband died. Not after I had surgery. You waited 2 weeks and then you gave me 11 minutes and a pen. Nora, I'm your mother. And I said the truest thing I have ever said out loud. I said, "You're the woman who gave birth to me. That's biology, and nobody can take that from you. But the mother is a thing you do. It's showing up. It's putting your kid before yourself when it costs you something. You've never once done that. Not one time in 28 years. She was sobbing. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I believe you," I said. "But sorry doesn't fix everything. Some things just stay broken and you have to carry them." I hung up. I blocked the number. Walt was standing in the kitchenette. He'd heard all of it. He didn't say a word, he just walked over, handed me a paper towel because we were out of tissues, and sat down next to me on the couch. After a while I said, "Then why does it hurt so much?" And he said something I've thought about almost every day since. He said, "Because you loved them, honey. And they taught you that love means putting up with whatever they hand you. You're teaching yourself a different lesson right now. That's all this is. It hurts because it's new." I moved in February. Small 2-bedroom in Tacoma. Second floor, radiator heat, a window in the kitchen that gets sun until about 4. 2.5 hours from where I grew up, close enough for Walt and Corinne to make a weekend of it, far enough that I will never turn a corner at a grocery store and see somebody from that church. I hung Caleb's picture on the wall of Micah's room at eye level for a crawling baby. It's the one from the shop, sawdust in his hair, safety glasses pushed up on his forehead, laughing at something I said behind the camera. My son is going to know that face before he knows the alphabet. I found remote accounting work. Small firm out of Olympia. The woman who hired me knew the whole story and never once brought it up, which is its own kind of grace. Shay, Caleb's sister, drives down from Bellingham every other weekend. She brings groceries she pretends she had extra of. She does my dishes without asking. She's teaching Micah to clap. Walt and Corinne come the first weekend of every month. Corinne sings him the same lullaby she sang Caleb, and the first time I heard it I had to go stand in the bathroom for a minute. Nobody has ever once asked me when I'm going to move on. They just keep showing up. That's the whole thing, isn't it? That's the entire lesson, and it took me 28 years and a house fire to learn it. Family is not who you came from. Family is who shows up and stays after it stops being easy. A letter came in March. Forwarded through my attorney, because my mother doesn't have my address and won't be getting it. I carried it around in my purse for 4 days without opening it. Then I stood at my kitchen sink and I burned it and watched it curl up black and go down the drain. I didn't need to read it. I already know what's in it. More apologies. Some part about how he wasn't always like this. Probably a line asking if I'd consider telling the jury he was a good father once. Maybe he was. I don't know anymore. I have some good memories and I don't know what to do with them, so mostly I just leave them alone. But he wasn't a good father on the night that counted. And she wasn't a good mother on the afternoon that counted. And I've decided I'm not going to spend the rest of my life trying to sand 2 people down into somebody they were never going to be. Another letter came in May. I burned that one too. It took less time. Micah turned 6 months old at the end of May. We took him down to the waterfront on a Saturday. Shay drove down for it, and there were about 200 seagulls on the pilings, and he lost his mind. Belly laughing. That wide open, no teeth, whole body baby laugh. And I caught myself smiling. Not performing it. Not doing the thing where you arrange your face so people stop worrying about you. Actually smiling. First time since November. He laughs like Caleb, Shay said. Same wind-up. He does, I said. We sat on a bench and she started planning his first birthday, which was still 6 months out, and I let her, because that's how Shay grieves. Then she asked me, careful, not looking at me, do you think you'll ever forgive them? I've thought about that a lot. My counselor asks me some version of it every other week. Here's where I've landed. Forgiveness and access are 2 different things. Maybe one day I'll get to a place where I can think about my parents without my chest going tight. Maybe I'll set the anger down because it's heavy and I'm tired of carrying it. That might happen. I hope it does, honestly, for my sake, not theirs. But putting down the anger doesn't mean opening the door. It doesn't mean pretending they're safe. You can forgive a dog for biting you and still not let it in the house with a baby. They taught me that family means eating whatever's put in front of you. That love means making yourself smaller. That saying, "this hurts," makes you ungrateful. I'm not teaching him that. That night I wrote something down, because my counselor says writing it makes it real. They don't get to be his grandparents. They stopped being my parents in room 214 on December 2nd at 2:29 in the afternoon. They chose it. I'm just the one who wrote it down. Some doors close because you're weak. This one closed because I finally got strong enough to know it should stay shut. The trial is set for this fall. The prosecutor's office called last week. They want me on the stand. I said yes. Not for revenge. I want to be honest with you about that, because I know what channel you're on and I know what you clicked. This isn't revenge. Revenge would feel better than this does. I'm testifying because Caleb deserves somebody in that room saying his name out loud in front of 12 strangers. Because Micah is going to be able to look up a transcript someday and see that when somebody took his father, his mother stood up. And because there are people watching this right now who are going to be handed a stack of papers by somebody they trust, with the pens already sitting on the lines. So let me leave you with the 4 things this cost me to learn. 1. Read what you sign. All of it. Every page. If somebody rushes you, that's not urgency, that's the whole plan. 2. When a person makes a reasonable question feel disloyal, stop and back up. My husband asked one fair question and got hit with, "Do you even love my daughter?" He never asked again. It killed him. 3. Watch what people do at your worst moment, not your best. Anybody can show up for a wedding. Look at who's in the room on the 4th day, when you smell like a hospital and you have nothing to give them. And 4, this is the one I'd tattoo on my arm if I were a tattoo person. Being someone's child does not make you their debt. You are not a balance to be settled. You're not an inconvenience to be reassigned. You're not a line item on somebody's retirement plan. You're a person. And if the 2 people who made you can't manage to treat you like one, you are allowed to walk out and go build it yourself somewhere else, with people who actually mean it. That's what I did. That's what this apartment is. That's what the picture on my son's wall is. That's what Walt and Corinne and Shay are. My parents gave me a life. They just couldn't give me love. And it turns out those are 2 completely different gifts, and you only need one of them to be okay. So, your turn. If you've ever had to walk away from your own family to save yourself, I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments. Tell me how long it took. Tell me if it got easier, because some nights I'm still not sure, and I could use hearing it from somebody who's further down the road than I am. And if you got a mother, or a father, or a brother who showed up when nobody made them, go call them today. Not tomorrow. Today. I keep choosing us. Micah and me and everybody who stayed. What would you have done?